Hello everyone, Oregon Moto John. I'm excited to put a different rear shock on the CRF 300L. Spike's been good, but just the rear suspension is a little saggy, and for my weight of around 190 pounds, if you're around 150, 160, I think you could get by just fine, very likely. So don't just swap it out right away. Just ride it and see what you think. You may get by fine. And depending on your riding style, it may be fine. Just feels a little bouncy, trouncy on certain things. So to remove this shock, it's actually one of the easiest shocks I've ever removed. I've had bikes where I've had to loosen the swing arm and do all kinds of stuff. And this one, and the rear wheel, this one, you slip it out. You put a 14 millimeter on that one, okay, socket with an extension. Doesn't even need to be this long. Kind of like this, 14 millimeter with a ratchet. Put that on there to hold it. And then you go to the other side with a 17 millimeter. And you come over here and you get that on there. See that nut? It's a lock nut. Looks like it may have a washer. It was easy to get on. You put your 14 millimeter on here and just break it loose. That was really tight. I had to use some muscle to do that, and I pre-broke these loose, so it's just a little easier. You're going to remove that, and then you come down here, and it's just a matter of loosening this 14 millimeter nut off. I broke that off, and then this little wishbone here is going to drop out of the way, and then it's just a matter of removing this 14 millimeter on the bottom of the shock, and that shock will pull right out the bottom. I am putting something underneath the wheel here. I'm going to lower the bike down to that so that when I remove the shock, the swing arm doesn't just flop down with the weight of the tire. You could use a strap around the seat and around this part to hold it. I just didn't want this stuff getting pulled on by a strap, but I'm sure it would have been fine. So, there we have it. Let's kind of finish this up. So I'm going to take off this one. Okay, just like that. And I don't feel a washer. And then we'll just pull that out of there. So I was able to pull this up from the side. I just lifted up on the wheel a little bit. And as I lifted the pressure off, this will pull right out that side, and I don't feel any grease on here. So we're gonna grease that up when we put it back together. So let's finish removing this bolt, and then we'll go from there. I'm just gonna lower this bike down a little bit to get this to where it's resting on something so I don't have anything bouncing around on me. Not really putting the weight on it, just barely touching down. And this easily pulled right out the side. Now this wishbone will just drop down. I guess we could take that apart and grease that while we're in here, but we'll see. Now it's just a matter of loosening that up and then taking out the other side. So, sometimes you can take pictures. This went in like so. If you're ever in doubt, just take a few pictures of, orientation of things, then you won't forget. So you can take a picture of that right there. This is the shock we're putting in, the YSS suspension shock for the CRF 300L. That's what that looks like. Looks like a decent quality shock to me. I have a spring for the front, but that's another day. Right now we're focusing on the rear. I'm not seeing a ton of grease. I mean, it's adequate, but I'm just going to push this over. This is an extra step. You don't need to do this. I'm going to put some extra grease in there, slide that back over, and then do the other side. But again, this doesn't have anything to do with installing the shock. You got to be careful, else these needle bearings will go everywhere. Don't ask me how I know that. And then I'm just going to put some grease in here, and then slide that back. I'm using some Motor X grease. You could use some Maxima grease, and then I'll just slide that back and do the other side. And for what it's worth, I did give this a better than average detailing before washing the bike before I worked on it. We don't want to have grease contaminating different areas, so Wash your bike when you're going to be opening it up. Now we have clean areas to grease, and I'll grease all these points, and now we have grease inside of that. Again, this is extra. You don't have to do that step, but it doesn't hurt if it's apart anyway. Okay, now we're going to hold this 14 millimeter on the right side of the bike, or the throttle side, and we're going to walk around the bike and go to the left side or clutch side, and we're going to remove this 17 millimeter nut. You can easily get a socket in there, and we're just going to turn that off and remove that nut. There is a washer beneath this lock nut, so just you know, be aware of that. Don't drop it somewhere where it's hard to get at. You can use a magnet, or I'm just going to grab it with my fingers and pull it off. Here's what that washer looks like. I'm going to set these there in the same orientation, so when they go back, I'll be able to put them right back on there on the clutch side of the bike. So let's take this this bolt out now. I'm just going to lift up lightly on the wheel back here to relieve tension on it, and that bolt should just push right out. And it did. I just pushed with my thumb on the end of that bolt as I lightly lifted up on this tire to relieve pressure, and it just pulled out. So let's come over to this side. And it's just going to be a matter of pulling this bolt out of here from this side. And again, I'm going to get my fingers on here, and then I'm going to take my left hand and lightly relieve the pressure with my left hand as I pull on the bolt with my right hand. And when we put the bolt back in, it'll be a similar procedure, just to wiggle that a little bit to get that bolt lined up when we're putting the new shock on. Okay, and that bolt easily came out. I'm just going to set that here. We'll probably grease that up before we put it back in. There's no grease on it, not the end of the world, but we'll grease it before we put it back on. Now it's just a matter of removing this last bolt right here, and that shock will just pull right out. So here we are on the clutch side or left side of the bike, and I'm just going to loosen up this bolt right here. I've pre-loosened it so it goes a little faster. And that's spinning since it's a lock nut, so I'm going to get a 14 millimeter on that other side, and this is a 17 on this side on that nut. And with that lightly held, it's hitting the tire even. 14 on this side, 17 on this side. That's going to come right off. And the 17 goes on the shock, this nut, which I believe is pretty much the same as this one. These are both 17 millimeter nuts. Okay, now I'm going to grab onto the shock with one hand and pull this bolt out, and then pull this little support back towards the wheel, and the shock should drop right out. Just a little tip with the bike all the way in the air, this didn't want to move back to let this fall out, but when I lowered the bike down, this wheel pushed up, and then it opened, moved this in, so the shock could easily drop out. So I'm going to leave it in this position to put the new shock, feed it up through there. We'll get in this top bolt, and then we'll raise the bike back up and finish up buttoning up these other parts. Now I'm going to grease this little needle bearing while I'm at it too. So I'm going to insert this shock up from the bottom. I'm going to have the YSS to the back because it looks cool. And we're just going to get this inserted up in there. And there's our target. And I'm going to have this in my right hand and feed it up through the bottom. And just put that first bolt in up top. You can see I'm holding this with my left hand, and I'm just lining that bolt up, and I'm just going to slip it in through there and wiggle this around just to get in. And I did grease that top of that shock just to make this a little easier. That bolt's in, fed in. Now we're going to put the nut on in a second, but let's go ahead and slip this bolt through next on that shock. And so here's this one. We're going to insert it in here over, and I'm going to grease this up in case we ever need to remove it again. Just a light skimming of grease on here is all you need. Dissimilar metals sometimes can create a reaction and want to get stuck pretty good. So just a light skimming of grease, and now we're just going to go ahead and line this up, and we'll push this in. And it appears that that lower shock mount has threads on it, so we're going to see, I think this just turns in. We're just going to thread that in. We'll see if we need that nut on the other side of this or not. And I'm sure we'll still put the nut on there just for good measure. Yeah, that's got threads on it. Let's see how far that sticks out the other side. So it does thread into this piece here, but I'm still going to put this nut on for good measure. We don't want anything coming loose. So let's put our nut on here, and also our nut on up there, and torque to spec. On the clutch side, left side of the bike, this 17mm was fairly tight, so I didn't try to strip it, but I did make sure it was snugged out and bottomed out, you know, nice and tight before I was done with it. Now we'll tighten up this lower shock mount bolt, because once we slip this clevis or kind of wishbone part of the suspension up, you can no longer tighten this. So let's snug up that 17mm nut. Probably need to hold it on the opposite side with a 14mm. Last but not least, we'll put a light skimming of grease on this bolt, and we're gonna, you know, put this back up, line that up by you know, lowering or raising the wheel as necessary, and then tighten the nut up on the other side, and then we are done. And it's just a matter of setting the ride height and the what we call the rider sag or race sag. So I did go over there and I just pumped my pedal up. This is a Tusk motorcycle stand with hydraulic lift. It's done pretty well. It's kind of a budget one, but you know what? It works fine. And so I was just able to pump up the bike and had my wheel setting on my little setup over here until this lines up, and now it's just a matter of slipping this through. So this makes jobs like this easy to do. Excuse me. It also makes it easy to you know, detail your bike. You can put it up on a stand and, you know, don't have to bend over. So I don't know, worth every penny in my opinion, when, you know, if you can find a place for it. Now it's just a matter of putting that bolt in, and don't hammer that through like it sticks, because it's hitting the other side of that wishbone. And so I'm just going to razor lower the bike. I'll probably end up put my hand up here and just jiggling the wheel a little bit as I'm pushing on this bolt. Now it's just a matter of putting this on and tightening this up to spec. Okay, we'll get a wrench on there. I'll probably have to hold it from the other side as I finish tightening that down, and I'll wipe off all that excess grease. Any excess grease outside of where it's supposed to be just collects dirt, so we'll make sure that's all clean. I just keep a horsehair brush, or I'm sure it's not horsehair, I'm sure it's fake, but I just keep these near my grease with the lid on, so then it's easier to grease things. I'm not having to always use my fingers. You can get those on Amazon, so that's a handy little tip. And then here's this Tusk stand. I'm not affiliated with Tusk anyway, but you can raise or lower the bike. Like now I'm done with the project, I just pump this up, and it's budget. This thing kind of flops around a little bit. It's not as nice as my Motosport one, but it's got wheels on the bottom so you can move it around. And now I'll remove my props out from underneath there and lower the bike and take my little things off the foot pegs, and we'll see what this suspension feels like. So there's the old shock there. I'll just set that aside, and I don't know, we can stick around till the end of time, I suppose. And then we have our new shock on, and it's looking good. I mean, if it looks to do anything, it looks good. Everything bolted up nice. We can still get to the adjuster here, and then there's an adjuster up top, which is in the front of the shock, which hopefully won't need to do much adjusting there. And then there's also an adjuster, you know, for getting the ride height, which is easily accessible. So let's get off the stand and just see how it feels. The shock did come with instructions, so we can specifically see which each of those do. So we have the shock installed on the bike. I'm going to spare you watching a middle-aged man bounce around on the bike, but I will say it still has nice rider sag, and it still seems to settle in the way it did with the old shock. It doesn't feel like it's jacked up in the back or anything weird, if that makes sense. It feels good. Feels compliant, it feels soft. I went with the softer setup from YSS. I didn't want this bike to be too firm. So that being said, I'm going to take it for a ride before I button up this video, just to give you my thoughts over what it feels like with that washboard. I went over some washboard with the stock setup, and the rear wheel would start to chatter uncontrollably, and I'm just curious if it's better with this shock. So I'll let you know before the end of this video. Okay, as you can tell from all the dust on the bike, I just got back from a quick ride on a little bit of pavement, a lot of gravel roads, mainly gravel roads, a little bit of single track, and the suspension works better. I like it. It doesn't bounce around, doesn't pogo stick over washboard anymore. It feels more controlled on single track. I question if I'll do anything to the front fork for a while. It feels better on the pavement because I'm not so low, riding so low in the stroke. Or changing the fork angle when I'm riding on pavement. You know, having the back end so settled down so low. It felt good. Now, the thing is, if you're 150, 160, 170 pounds, you may not need to worry about it. Maybe you just ride it. I think it'd be okay, but for me, 190, give or take a little bit, it just kind of, especially the washboard where it would pogo stick up and down, the YSS suspension helped prevent that pogo sticking that the OEM suspension was doing. Here's the shock that I put in. And it didn't have the reservoir like that. At least the one I bought didn't. Let's see what we got here. I got the all-road one for 155 to 187 pounds. CRF 300L. That's what I got. They have one that's for, you know, more like a track, and but I wanted something that just was a little easier sprung. So there you have it. Hope this helps. And I also posted up gonna make a video of riding that washboard and single track with the new shock, so you can see what that actually looks like, and I'll kind of talk through that. All right, hope this helps and that you're having a good day. We'll see you again soon. Keep riding.